there's all these like researches out there, so many practical ways. I mean, speaking from personal experience, that with all these information, how does one know where to start? You know, I mean, like there's so many good things. I don't know where should I start? Can you give us a guideline, or what do you recommend would be a good start for learners?
So, I think probably our best bet is to maybe take a little look at the brain and get a little background in how the brain works, and then we can understand sort of how to really dig into our learning and learn best. So if you look, I mean, the brain is like super complicated, but it does have this one fundamental building block. I mean, it has some other ones, but we'll just focus on neurons. And this is probably where you're thinking, you know, this is where this lecture is going to get so boring and scientific that I'm going to tune out right now. But wait, don't do that, because we're going to use a metaphor to help you learn more effectively about what this building block actually is. And our metaphor for that neuron, which there's like 86 billion neurons, give or take a few billion in your brain, then our metaphor is a space alien. And it's adorable. It's just an adorable space alien. And look at how our space alien has legs. It's got 3 legs. And on a real neuron, those legs are called dendrites. And then there's these little kind of toes that are coming off of the space alien's legs. And I mean, they may not look like that to you, but they look like toes to me. And so on a real neuron, those are called dendritic spines. They jut out all over the place. And since we actually know it's kind of a metaphor for a space alien, well, space aliens can have more than 10 toes, so it's okay. And lastly, space aliens have an arm that reaches out, and on a real neuron, that is actually called an axon. And what neurons love to do in your brain is they love to reach out, and let's see if I can, let me see. I'm going to try and go back. Let's see, come back here, because I want this to work right. There we go. They love to reach out and just touch each other. And so and what they're doing is when they touch, so their arm reaches out to touch the toe. Space aliens are really weird. And then they send a signal that way to the next neuron. So if you look, real life neurons are doing pretty much the same thing. There's a signal that goes along the arm of the neuron. It jumps across the gap, which is called the synapse, and then it goes on to the next neuron. It is a little more complicated. I will briefly acknowledge here that it is a little more complicated, but you don't need to worry about this. There's these neurotransmitters in between, but that's just fine. So we'll, that's how the signals jump across that synapse. But when you're learning something, what happens is you are actually making connections between neurons in your brain. And so let's say you learn a guitar chord, or you learn a vocabulary word in a foreign language, or you learn a dance step, or you learn how to take a derivation in mathematics. Anything you learn is connecting a set of neurons in your brain. And the more complicated the topic, the bigger the network that becomes connected. But that's the essence of what's happening when you're learning, is just you're making connections between neurons in long-term memory scattered around your neocortex. So when you practice, this is the cool thing. This is what's really happening, is those connections are actually strengthening. So the more you practice, the bigger and stronger those connections get. But on the other hand, if you don't practice, what happens is your sort of little synaptic janitor kind of knocks away the ones that haven't been used, those little toes that haven't been used. And even though you want to be learning with those toes, if you don't practice with them, you lose it. So in essence, what you're really doing is you're creating a set of links between neurons in your brain. And the more you practice, the stronger those links become. So they're just bigger and stronger, and you connect more neurons in, and you know the subject better. So kind of along the lines of what we had already been discussing, if you are learning actively, in other words, you're practicing, you're using recall, you're using retrieval practice, then what happens is come back here. Okay. So as you're trying to practice, you're growing these dendritic spines and you're wanting to make connections. But the thing is that it's nighttime when you're sleeping that those connections really are practiced the most. It's just fantastic. You can almost see, here's a good technique. Right before you go to sleep, think about the thing you most want to learn or understand or remember from what you were learning today. And that will signal your brain during sleep that, oh yeah, she wanted me to practice with this thing. And what your brain will do, everything else will go aside, and your brain will be like this little mouse running over this path over and over and over hundreds of times, and it will strengthen these connections that you're wanting to learn. And that's why you wake up in the morning, you look at a problem you were stuck in, and you're like, it's so easy. Why couldn't I see it before? It's because your brain was practicing when you're sleeping. And we can actually see this through light microscopy imagery. If you look, you are now a budding neuroscientist. This is a dendrite. And this is a dendrite after you've learned and you've slept. And everywhere that there's a little blue triangle, look, there's a new dendritic spine there. It wasn't there before. It grew to help with learning. So it's sleep when those little dendritic spines can really connect together and create strong connections. This is why it's so important to space out your learning. So you want to, if you have 5 hours to learn something, do not cram 5 hours on a Sunday. Instead, space it out. So it's 1 hour each day for 5 days. And what that'll do is it's you study that day, and then with retrieval practice, and then you go to sleep at night, you get a double hit of learning. Study, sleep, it reinforces. Study, sleep, it reinforces. And so that can really help you in the long run it's because you studied and then slept, you get this double reinforcement where if you did everything in one day, those same 5 hours, you're going to get a very weak set of connections ultimately, and it's a lot easier for your little, synaptic janitor to sweep those things away. So metaphorically speaking, because I love metaphors, it's a little bit like a brick wall. You have to lay a layer of bricks, then lay the mortar, then the bricks, but you can't go very high. You have to give it time to set as you're building that wall. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with a wall that's kind of like this. So it's more like, it's a lousy foundation for learning. And it is somewhat also like just weightlifting or any kind of physical exercise. This fellow did not sit down the night before some big meet and say, I think I'm going to cram. I got to build all this muscular structure in one evening. And yet because we can't see that into our brains, we often think that we can do that kind of thing with our brains. But your brain needs time to build that neural structure, just like he needed time. You need time to build your muscular structure. So one thing I do have to ask our learners is, what is the most powerful technique, do you think, that will help you learn most effectively? So I'm going to give you 4 different techniques, and what I want you to do is sort of mentally vote on which one you think is most effective. So is it rereading? Nisha, I know that you know the answer here, but we won't tell what the answer is, not yet. So could it be rereading? Because rereading is a way of practicing. I mean, it's repeating the material. So that might be helping you to learn more effectively. Or if you're highlighting the material, that means you're working actively because you're moving your hand. And so that must be, or could be, helping you to put that information more strongly in your brain. Or it could be something called retrieval practice or recall, where you, for example, have flashcards and use flashcards to learn with, or maybe look at a page, look away, see what the best technique is, or see what was the most important thing on that page, the most important concept. So retrieval practice is that kind of thing where you, what was that? And then look and see if you can retrieve it from your own brain. The final one is creating a concept map. So basically you're writing down the different concepts and trying to connect them together so that you really kind of see the big picture of what you're learning. So we've got 4 things, and we can kind of dun 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 dun. Which one is it? Okay, so hopefully you've got it in mind, and the answer is retrieval practice. So why could it be retrieval practice? It turns out that when you're first learning something, like your professor is teaching you something, or your friend is kind of trying to coach you, or you're trying to figure it out from a book, what's happening is you have this initial learning that is going on. It's making a faint set of connections in your brain. But unless you retrieve those connections, you'll actually not be able to strengthen them. Every time you retrieve them, you're actually strengthening and practicing with those connections. And so that is what can be the most helpful way. So don't sit there and reread constantly. Don't procrastinate until the last minute. Instead, just use retrieval practice, and that will really, really help your learning. I have to tell you why I cannot play the piano today. So this is me as a little girl. I'm playing the piano, and I found out, so my parents really wanted me to play the piano. And so I found out, though, that they never really cared what I was playing. So that meant as long as I was playing anything, they thought I was practicing. So I learned a song, and then I would play that song over and over and over again. I played it so much I could do it in my sleep. And in fact, I could do it when I was reading a comic book. So I put comic books in front of me, and I'd be practicing, but reading comic books. So I wasn't doing anything that was mentally demanding at all. And the result is I cannot play the piano today, unfortunately. It's because I didn't deliberately try to push myself onto harder and harder material. And so if you really want to make great strides, try to avoid, today I'm just going to review the easy stuff. Instead, a lot of times the hard stuff builds on this easy stuff. So you're naturally going to be kind of reviewing it. But keep your focus as much as you can on learning that harder stuff. Always keep pushing the envelope, push the edges, and that will make your learning happen much more quickly. A few final quick tips. There's a hard start technique for tests, and what this is when you're taking a test, people often say, do the easiest problem first. Well, if you haven't studied at all, that's your best bet because you want to take whatever points you can. But if you've studied, then what you want to do is you want to look over the test. You want to, kind of tick off what are the worst problems, the hardest ones, that count for points. Start with those, but only let yourself go for like a minute or two until you can feel yourself getting stuck. You don't do this thing where it's, I spent a half an hour on this problem and, I couldn't get anywhere and then I couldn't do the other problems on the test. No, just work a minute or two till you feel yourself getting stuck. Pull yourself off, go do an easier problem, maybe another easier problem. And then return to that harder problem and you'll be surprised. You could make progress on it. The reason is because when you were focusing on that hard problem, you got it in your brain, then you went to the easy problem and you're working on that, but your diffuse mode is working in the background on the hard problem. So it's almost like you have this double processor that's working at the same time. So you can be much more effective. You can get much further on those difficult problems and even finish them. Or if you waited until the very end of the test when you're really tired anyway and you're totally stressed because you have no time, that's a bad time to attack the worst problem on a test. Another technique that's just really, really helpful is to avoid shallow breathing. And so instead, you want to breathe very deeply, down deep into your belly. So if you can, put your hand on your belly and put your other hand up here. Shallow breathing is kind of like this. That's going to be up here, whereas deep belly breathing, you can almost try to make your hand move because you're breathing in so deeply. This deep breathing will relax you. So, and there's all sorts of good evidence, research evidence, that this is a terrific way to help relax you in periods of real stress. So like right before a big test and you're like, oh my goodness, and you feel the sweat on your fingers and everything. Just do this deep breathing to help calm yourself, and it will be very helpful for you.